Hi Robyn, thanks for joining us today. So can you give us a bit of your background and history with rare disease and health in general, please?
Yeah, hi, thank you for inviting me. So my sort of first memories of knowing that I had something a bit unusual was certainly pre-5, probably 3 or 4. And I remember sort of going to hospitals for blood tests and going up to London, which sort of was built as a bit of a treat at the time. But it was soon that I found out it wasn't really much of a treat at all. And I was diagnosed, actually, I was born in Australia, and I was, I think, quite sick when I was quite immediately after I was born. But I was diagnosed back in England by the time at least I think I was 6 months old with something called PK deficiency, which is a hemolytic anemia. The incidence is about 1 in 200,000, and it's very variable in how it affects you. So for me, it was regular blood tests to see how anemic I was, and then various quite acute episodes in my life where probably twice I thought I wasn't sure if I was going to survive. But a lot of the time, life goes on, and if you look at me now, I obviously look, I imagine, relatively normal. So yeah, that's sort of that's how it sort of started, and how my first sort of awareness of having something was really.
Great, well, we'll touch on those encounters you mentioned, but firstly, how does it impact your day-to-day life, or are there any specific challenges that you have to deal with your illness?
Okay, so my illness is, as I said, a form of anemia, so it's very much about red blood cells, so it's about energy production. So I don't have a certain amount of this enzyme that helps the energy production in red blood cells. So what that means at a practical level is that I run as anemic, and where a person who hadn't had this for years might really struggle with my blood levels, I actually can function pretty well. I teach yoga, I'm a therapist myself, I play a bit of sport, and have played quite a lot of sport in the past, but probably where I notice it on a day-to-day is that I can go from everything being okay, managing it, and then be completely flawed. And that can show up as just needing to sleep, or maybe like I might get an infection that somebody else would throw off in 24, 48 hours. For me, it might go on. And that's gone on more as I've got older. That's probably got worse, a little bit worse. And I think the biggest impact probably is when you have something that affects your energy and you don't look any different, and there's no physical, apart from being sort of quite yellow in the skin and yellow eyes, which people like to comment on. Apart from that, it's really mostly about how you feel, and that can be just like a dead, dull feeling inside. And that can really feel like it can just really, really floor you, and you sort of feel you want to pull yourself out of it because that's what you've always been taught to do. But actually, sometimes I've learned as I've got older, it's better just to go with it and fall into it a bit and accept it, and then it passes quicker.
Okay, and you mentioned you've had some sort of different levels of severity throughout your life. Sometimes you get them normally, and sometimes you can't. Can you tell us a bit about those life-threatening situations and when they occurred, if there's been any more recently than others, and how it's manifested?
Okay, so the first one really, the significant one, which was talked about all through my childhood, was you might one day have what's called a hemolytic crisis, when your spleen basically goes crazy and just eats up all your red blood cells madly. Mine, that often happens around periods of stress or infection. Mine happened when I was 21. It was the week of my finals as a physio. I went from doing my finals to being blue lighted into hospital that night. I'd done denial pretty well, which I think a lot of people with chronic illnesses will understand, and boxed it away and thought I'd be all right. But I was really sick by then. I was in heart failure, I had a hemoglobin of 4, and eventually had to have my spleen out when they got me well enough through transfusions. And then it took me the summer really. It took my 21 years that summer to sort of get better again and then retake my finals. So that was one episode. Because of having the spleen out, which is one of the things about hemolytic anemia, it means you're much more susceptible to infections, and so the one that pneumonias are sort of the biggies for us, and that happened out of the blue again 2 years ago. So I went from perfectly well to within 48 hours being in high dependency. I was in Australia at the time, and that was pretty scary as well. So it's like you can be functioning well, I can seem fine, and then you can be completely flawed. So it's that level of not living, so not letting that fear get under your skin so much that it affects how you live your life is probably one of the challenges.
Yeah, as you said, you tried as best you can live your life. Do you think there's been any sort of gift in this journey or with this disease? And as you say, you work in the health industry. Has it played a part in that, potentially?
Yeah, from very young, when I remember sitting in hospital clinics, I used to think, oh God, I really want to work in hospitals. And I liked science, so that was an easy route for me. I became a physio and trained from 18 to 21, and then from mid to late 20s, but particularly early 30s, my speciality has been in more of a holistic health route. And a lot of that has been born out of what I've experienced, because I've noticed that even when I've been physically really bad and mentally maybe a bit off with this illness, I've had something else inside me, I would call my spirit or my heart, really has felt like I can get through this. And other times it hasn't felt so like that. And so for me, and it's a very personal journey, but for me, I have definitely, and even my specialist acknowledges that I'm a lot more well than he would expect when he looks at my blood results. And I think a lot of that is down to a lot more of the mindful yoga, just acknowledging and not forcing through, which I did probably for many years far too much, just tried to ignore and push through. And now maybe softening into it and accepting has been the biggest, and surrendering to it all has been in some sense, has been one of the biggest journeys. And having two children who I was told, so giving hope to lots of people out there when you're told that you won't make certain sort of points in your life. I was told almost certainly I wouldn't be able to have children, and yet I had lots of blood transfusions to have them. But that for me was just has been the icing on the cake, has been incredible journey.
And have you got one final thought or bit of advice for our listeners or readers? Is there anything they sort of take away from you?
Yeah, for me, it's about don't be limited. Be informed by your specialist, absolutely, and listen to the doctors, but also you have a great wealth of knowledge inside your body and your heart. You know what you can do, and at some level, regularly listening to your gut instinct about whether you can push through, or whether you need to soften back, or whether you need to ask for support, or just don't be limited. You're much more than your story, and you're much more than your diagnosis. So I really, really believe that. I think you're all individual, and it's a journey for all of us.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you.